Hello, Josh. How are you?
Hey Sam, how are you? Get my coat out.
Good morning to you, and I am closing the Tuesday.
What?
I just say I'm closing the Tuesday and you're starting.
Yeah, exactly. What time is it here now? Yeah, 10 o'clock.
Oh, we have 9 hours of difference.
9 hours. Yeah. Oh yeah, and I forgot there was somebody wanted to know if we could cater to an Australian.
Yes. Oh my God, that's so difficult. Yes, that's so difficult. I think it's some of the companies they run meeting alternatively, but I think in that group we don't have many people Australian time.
Is that you?
Hello,
Sam?
Abby. Hello, Abby.
On the echo. Hello? Do you guys hear an echo on me or just Saeem?
It's me actually.
That's better.
Hello, Abby. Hello, Dinesh. Thanks for joining.
Hey Abby. You're muted if you're talking.
I'm just in a busier room, so I'm gonna stay muted if I don't have anything interesting to say. So most of the hour, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes. We got some interesting topics. Hey Robert.
Hello.
It's just 10:01, so we'll give it another couple minutes here. Hey, Thomas.
Hi, everyone.
I guess we could, if while we're waiting, we could introduce folks that are just jumping on. If you want to just say hello.
Yeah, hi, Dinesh, CTO at Civo. Only introduced to this working group, I think, yesterday or day before with sort of the open control plane project that we announced last week and some really good back and forth. So I said I would jump on the call today and just have a chat with you all about it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. No, Stefan was pretty excited. As soon as I saw that, I shared it with him and he was like, I got all kinds of feedback.
Actually, I spoke to him at KubeCon in America, and he mentioned it. I was like, oh, we were working on it then, but we kind of keeping it all quiet until we kind of launched it at our event. And I was like, I can see what you're doing, but I don't want to say what we're doing yet. But now we can talk openly about it, so that would be good.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Taras, good to see you.
Good to see everyone too.
Just waiting another minute, I guess. Almost ready to start. Does anybody? So there's another couple of new people here. Chip or Alejandro, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm a Golang developer in the research team in Civo, the developer in charge of the OpenCP. Dinesh is my boss.
Cool. Nice to meet you.
My name's Chip. I'm a Kyverno maintainer, and so we're interested in being a part of the platform discussion because we see that policy and governance are critical pieces of platform. So good to see everybody.
Did you say Kyverno?
Yes.
Okay. I heard kernel at first and I was like, wow, that's maybe a little stretch. Maybe post the link here for. All right, let's get started. I don't wanna waste people's time. I'm just posting this link here. Okay. So let me post the agenda into the meeting here if people want to follow along or add things. So we're on the 2023-214 page. I propose for the agenda for today to start by talking about three kind of ideas that have come up in the paper that I want to kind of discuss in person and get people's takes on. Let's try to limit that to the first 20-25 minutes max. That maybe mention the paper, publishing the paper. That's not such a big deal right now. And then second level work items, which we've kind of talked about a little bit before, but what we mean by that is going into the I think the list of capabilities, and in each one taking a second step and identifying the projects, identifying synergies, potential standards, conventions. So that's why Dinesh and Alejandro are here. They'll help us understand the open control plane. Yeah, if that's all right, I'll just start up at the top of the agenda. So deadline, first I want to remind everyone the deadline for Content Complete is February 28th, which is 2 weeks from today. I think it's gone pretty well the past month. We've gotten, I would say synchronous, but we've gotten some good PRs. Thank you, Saeem and Abhinav, especially, and Abby. Thank you, everybody. Thomas, Taras, everybody that's contributed there. I mean, the thoughts and the writing is really helpful. In fact, probably all three of these things are going to be, based on those discussions there. So yeah, I guess I think on the Content Complete, as long as we cover these last three, I think we're doing pretty good. So let's just talk about, let's jump into the next one, I guess, unless somebody has a comment on the Feb 28th deadline. Okay, so the first one that's come up is a couple places in the doc we attempt to help people understand what a platform might be by giving an example of a platform pretty early on in the why and what sections. Kind of the three use cases that we focus on there are, one, the kind of internal developer platform kind of use case. The next is the MLOps platform kind of use case. And the third, I think, is a COTS, third-party software kind of use case. But we've kind of gone back and forth on that. We definitely, I think we all would agree, we don't want to, say these are the types or anything. We're just trying to illustrate. But is that helpful? Should we, be thoughtful? Are those the right use cases? Where do those go? That's what I wanted to bring up here. So I put on.
Yeah, so that's a great point. And I think it's challenging, right? Because we don't want to be prescriptive on this is a platform and this is exactly how it looks like. We have to kind of surface it with the fact that every platform is going to look different in every single organization. And I think we've done that in the paper. I think the key for when I'm thinking about that section is just elucidating that it doesn't have to be just developers for using the platform, right? And just kind of illustrating some examples that can do that without, again, being too prescriptive, right? I think that's like at least kind of the angle I was approaching it at. Like, so for example, like the MLOps one is a good one, right? Because hey, like there's other folks besides developers, there's data scientists, AI folks who also need to leverage software, leverage it on the platform, right? Similarly, like we could take potentially like a FinOps angle as an example, or just make it even more open-ended, like we have the open source software, and kind of just being able to talk about that at a high level today. But I think the key thing in that is just, again, just making sure we're not being too prescriptive about introducing the idea that there are more than just developers who are using it, and that it's not, IDP is one manifestation, but a platform is different to so many organizations. So those are kind of my thoughts there.
I wonder, is the scope of this paper beyond the other kinds of platforms, or is the scope of this paper internal developed platforms?
We don't want it to only be internal developer platforms.
Okay.
But I guess if you want to make that argument that platforms are one-to-one with internal development, like we can talk about that. But yeah, I think at this point, we're not thinking they're one-to-one.
It's just more a question, not a statement, just a question, clarifying question.
Yeah, we're going to get the question a million times, so it's good that you're asking it. And yeah, I'm sure, does anybody disagree with that? Would anybody want us to pursue internal developer platforms as like, that is what a platform is?
I think that would go against like the idea of platforms as we are, working with, that became popular because like off-the-shelf platforms were really great if you had those use cases, but we started talking about these internal platforms, especially in the cloud native landscape, because every organization has different needs. So we need this focus on addressing the user requirements that are different. Like there are some common ones, of course, but if we are too much prescriptive into what is a platform, then yeah, we end up more into a like platform as a service thing. Like these are the use cases of the platform. So if you want something else, then it's outside the scope, but it's challenging, yeah, because we want some concrete examples, as you said, but to make it understandable, but not too much constraining us into the definition of, oh, we only deal with this and this, or this type of user, or this small set of capabilities. So, yeah. To sum up, I don't know if it makes sense what I said, but I agree with keeping it open, like being still precise, not too much abstract, but keeping it open to different use cases.
Yeah, I think it's quite good. I think it would be quite nice to have examples that are not just software oriented. So I actually would say MLOps would be in some cases still quite techy, versus like when you introduce COTS, like, oh, it's like Salesforce, like providing like kind of support systems around like Salesforce for like the sales team, or around like the marketing team around Google Analytics and things like that. Like, I wonder if actually completely diverging away from software development, coding, like aligned, which I totally appreciate that data scientists are a separate discipline.
Yeah.
But I think you'd argue like a lot of people could bucket those depending on the organization. And so I think possibly that might be quite helpful to like be like platforms are about business use cases, and that could be across your divisions. And so I think COTS was a really good example you had there, and there could be more. So
yeah, like one thing we've seen is like this whole like FinOps, right? And how they want to be able to track costs between different business units, right? So that's a business outcome, right? And they can, they leverage a platform for that. But then we don't have to tie it to, hey, this has to be only tracking Kubernetes costs or infrastructure and whatever. There's a business outcome that's tied specifically to that. Similarly, like the Palo Alto blog that I said, they're using it a lot for incident management and that kind of stuff, and that's a customer success use case, right? Again, not maybe a developer specific use case or coding use case, like Abby pointed out. So yeah, I think we have a good start to examples. Maybe that's something we can flesh out definitely more and even elucidate that in the paper, that they don't have to be coding specific use cases or software delivery specific use cases, if that makes sense.
I really like the idea of that you kind of captured all of these as business value, like the types of the platforms, whatever. It's really about different business use cases. Maybe we could, the section could be stating like the kind of platform you build is based on the business value you expect to give and here, attain, and here's, 3 or 4.
And I think in some cases the platform is built for those users, and in some cases the platform provides visibility for those users. So like in the FinOps example, I think it's less about, at least in my experiences, it's not been about providing tooling to the like CFO office. It's been about providing access to data. Like the people are able to like collect the data and therefore provide that in a spreadsheet to the CFO team. So it's not, but I think there's access to tooling, and then there's also just visibility into things that are both outcomes of a platform. So
I think I mentioned before that it's we need to start somewhere, and just defining platforms a little bit more rounded rather than saying a specific type of platform makes sense, because at that point we will have something to build upon later. We could do a deep dive into internal developer platform or a FinOps platform, or even data platform, if someone wanted to write about that. Like any type of platform, we could do that later on. But we kind of need to start a little bit more broad and have something to work with.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because I mean, the conversations that we're having with our clients, customers are coming to us and saying we want to build platforms, and one of the questions they're asking is like, well, what about like low code platforms, or platforms for folks who are not developers. And I think so far, at least on the Backstage world, there hasn't been a particularly good answer to that, because Backstage is so much geared towards developers, but there is work happening by a bunch of teams to make Backstage more open. So I think there's a lot of interest in having platforms for others. It's just kind of a new idea.
I've been I like that you said that. I've been kind of thinking like developers are our early adopters, like always.
I think part of this is getting IDP use cases nailed down has been challenging, but those broader use cases is something that would be really interesting to figure out. But I personally don't have a lot of data around it, so we could to see what we can gather over the years. In the future.
Okay, so to wrap this, well, the one thing I didn't ask is where to put it. And I kind of think where it is right now isn't so bad, which is at the end of the what is a platform section. Just maybe we just iterate on those last, I don't know, 3 or 4 paragraphs that have 2 lists.
Yeah, I could take the stat, because I know I have the PR open for that, and that's something we were discussing. So based on today's conversation, I can do the initial stat of that. But since it's already in progress, if that sounds good.
Cool. Okay, let's move to the next, being conscious of time. So the next one, really interesting conversation this week with Abhinav, Abby, and whoever else has been chiming in about the use of the term internal. And also we brought up kind of, or I don't know how we ended up, but I brought up in that context, thinnest viable platform. Just to explain why that made me think of it. So to me, when Abby and Abhinav, when we were talking about internal, it said to me what the focus of the team should be. It reminded me of the challenges that we've brought up, like stay focused, choose your priority. And so that reminded me of like, if internal means focus on what your group needs, then thinnest viable platform kind of supports that. Like, don't do too much if your enterprise doesn't need it. So that we were kind of batting around, like, can we put a paragraph in about that somewhere? It seems like that's a valuable, I don't know, it's attribute of platform. I don't know where it goes exactly, but yeah, discuss.
Yeah, so funnily enough, I was chatting with Abby and Josh, and it turns out we had included the paragraph. Then a couple of days later, Gartner, in one of their platform, they showed thought leadership and all that kind of stuff, and they talked about thinnest viable platforms as well. So it seems like something that's gaining trend. I guess one thing I'd love to ask the group, Taras, especially you've kind of been very central in helping teams build platforms, is that from when they're kind of approaching designing a platform, right? Are they thinking about it very much like a product MVP style? Like, here are the specific use cases we should target first. Here's the roadmap. I just want to make sure the platform as a product is definitely a mentality that I think is worth embracing. I just want to make sure we're not going too deep and saying like it's like an MVP, and there must be some nuances there too. So I'd love to hear your viewpoints on, kind of the approach to designing platforms, and where are they starting with like an MVP like approach, or is it something different that we're missing?
I didn't hear who is it for me or someone else?
Yeah, you are honestly, this is for everybody, right? So like, I guess like,
okay.
Is there like, I just want to like get everybody's thoughts in terms of like, is this kind of the style that folks have seen so far in terms of developing a platform in the early stages?
One thing that we've been encouraging our customers to do is to build as much as you need to be able to start the conversation with the developers, with the users. And so I have a blog post that kind of goes through like how you do that with Backstage, but because you can go quite deep, but starting with this, like, you know, sometimes like if you want to get started, just having everything, all the links on one page is a place to start. You know, and then going deeper and deeper, and like, but getting the protocols in place to be able to get feedback from users. So I think the idea of like thinnest viable platform is not even, to me, it resonates not even from the perspective of it being an MVP, but from the perspective of like, yeah, I mean, it's what is the least amount of tech that you can put in place that will actually help your users.
And then oh,
I
sorry.
would agree with that. In my experience, it's not that, you know, the like thinnest, you know, viable product MVP type like scenario, that is not in particular like a customer ask in if that makes sense. It's more of a thing that I think many of us who have been dealing with clients and helping them building platform services ask for, like, or help them to find. So I think having some sort of mention in like how to not a, you know, I don't want to call it a roadmap, but something to that effect that like we can point to and show that you should probably start thinking about what is the minimal viable platform. That's the new MVP. That actually will be make your users more efficient. Like where do you start and what can you build up, you know, from? Again, getting that starting point.
I think
in
it's
my head, the thinnest viable platform really fits well with folks that are trying to figure out how to establish like the business systems side in general to it. It almost forces you to map out who's going to need access to this, what tools are you going to provide, you know, whether dev related or not. And then I really liked I think it was in Abby's updates, or it was somewhere in there, the use of platform core, which kind of comes alongside that in establishing like what's the technical core or foundation of a platform. And that touches on the technical side a little more. I'm just thinking in my head, I really like that minimum viable platform does bring a focus back to the business side. And a lot of us devs don't start there or consider for that. And so calling that out separately from the technical side is nice.
I think one thing so yes, and to all of these reasons for talking about it, like one trend I'm seeing across all the reasons that have been stated so far is that they're about how to get value to people quickly, how to drive out requirements, how to build a product, right, for this platform. The other side that's probably worth touching on from thinnest viable is that it's also the least amount to maintain. So it's not only use the thinnest viable to get moving quickly and get high value out to customers, but stay thin, because like you don't want to be creating a way to serve on-demand databases that isn't leveraging a cloud provider that does on-demand databases, probably, unless that's your core business value. But like if you're just a web app, you're probably not going to get benefit from writing your own Postgres drivers. And I think that's where the other side of thinnest viable is keeping things as thin as possible, making sure that the value your team is providing is value to the business long term, and not just kind of tech for tech's sake, basically.
I think this all makes sense as a thing to have, or at least have like a discussion about how to include in the white paper. Like I said, I don't think this is something that like people that are building platforms necessarily think about, which is why the people who did then ask for help usually tell them about, what do you actually need to get the job done, and what will what would be beneficial for your developers, and not just add even more complexities and things that they probably don't need. That is something a lot of people have a tendency of like skipping over and just thinking, all right, we're going to build this and this and this, and then you have this like humongous platform thing that actually doesn't add anything or help anyone. So I think it is necessary to have indeed.
Yeah, and a way to get feedback early too, right? Like, you know, the idea is like you want to build, you want to get that, you don't want to build something so large and the next thing you know, you're having to re-architect and everything. So yeah, I think the TVP approach, at least from what I've been reading, Josh, sorry, I forget the name of the initial author who wrote
It comes from the Team Topologies folks.
Team Topologies, yeah.
Matthew
So
Skelton and whatever the name.
yeah, so I think it's showing a lot of thought leadership in the early days about platform as product, and now we're starting to see the Gartner, and recently I had talked to a Forrester guy about some stuff that we're launching in the future, and same thing, you know, they're kind of like have this approach for it. So I think it's worth mentioning in the paper for sure. And maybe Josh, would be good, like we kind of mention it like in a lightweight way, and then we have a follow-up paper which really talks about like a platform as product approach and how you can kind of cater to your organizational structure, and like what are the processes you can take, like kind of what Taurus already has a PR about certain things you can do today. So
yeah, 100%. I want to keep. Oh,
sorry.
No,
go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move us forward.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna move forward. Okay, sorry, I thought I was, you know, the dog is annoying. Go be a dog. So I think it's kind of nice to have the thinnest viable platform kind of come back in again, because I think Team Topologies is one of like the books that kind of like on an organization, you know, wise journey, it started to make people more ready for having something like platform engineering. To I think it's kind of like the start of what's happening now, and it does make sense that is also included when we are talking about platforms. Not necessarily that every answer for what you do as, you know, in platform engineering comes from that book, but it's that book that kind of like on the business side at least started like pointing organizations in a better direction. And I personally, I think like having a thinnest viable product, you know, focus is good. Like you said, Abby, you know, not having something that's getting bloated and and completely unnecessary. You know, keep it slim, unlike myself.
Okay, so yeah, so what I wasn't gonna what I was gonna say is I'm trying to think where this might go. It kind of seems like it might go in the attribute section, so I was gonna say that, and we can discuss that more offline. Abby, yeah, you want to talk about internal real quick?
Sorry, other mute button. Yeah, I when you had said moving on, I just wanted to make sure, because it feels like they are independent in that, and internal seem to spark quite a lot of response. And I think I'm not too bullish on needing internal to be used in some sort of like title space or anything else like that. But I think within our group, it's worth making sure we're on the same page of like, similar to how we agreed, we don't want to be limited to just IDPs. We want to be more talking about platforms. Are we talking about platforms that companies sell to their customers or like external? Like, so for example, the last company I worked for was an API company, and they talked about their product as a platform, like their product they sold was the thing called a platform at their company. It was quite an awkward, like, who's the platform team? It was very weird. And like, in my understanding, by being a part of this group, is that we're talking about internal platform teams. So things which accelerate the development and the like capabilities of the teams that deliver value to external customers. And so is anybody confused by that or want to raise whether or not that's really what we're trying to talk about? And B, is there somewhere that we need to or could benefit from highlighting that in the paper to make sure that we're all on the same page with our readers as well?
I really like this article. I posted the link in the Slack channel by Adrian Cockcroft. And one of the things he says, I'll post here the quotes, is around that. he makes the distinction between internal platforms and external platforms, and what is the difference according to him. I think it's quite interesting. The way he puts it might get some inspiration for the paper. And yes, I agree with you, Abby, to focus on internal. And yeah, I agree on making that clear in the paper as well, perhaps in the introduction, or what is a platform, just to set the scene.
One thing I'm thinking about on this is, so I think what I'm hearing from Abby is internal is focusing to the value stream teams. I don't know. I guess so, right? I guess I'm not that opposed to it. I am like, would somebody run this? Is this excluding somebody running like a PaaS 2.0? That is a platform. It's intended. It's an internal platform as a service, and does that even make sense? Like, you know what? Like if I was running a managed Kubernetes service and I said you can use this as your internal, like, is that confusing? That's what I'm a little bit wondering about.
So
I think that's where you have to talk about then it's viable platform for the business. So businesses, even businesses that use Heroku, even business like, which is like everyone always holds the gold standard of don't we wish we had Heroku, even though Heroku still exists, but it exists. Like even companies that use like fantastic PaaS offerings have other things they offer. Like they also have databases that are in the cloud somewhere, or they also have edge compute somewhere with caching, or they also have like something. And so so that's where that thin is viable might be heavily backed by single usable SaaS offerings, right? Like there's lots of those big ones out there, but there's typically something that people are tying together. And if there isn't, it's probably because they're not the target of our paper. If in our paper we say right at the beginning, this is for large enterprises. So again, if you're a small company and get away with just using one PaaS offering, you're in a good spot and you shouldn't complicate your life until you have to. And I don't think anyone in this call is advocating otherwise. But the companies we're talking to probably need it.
And I think there's kind of two things, right? Like I feel like no platform I feel is going to be, I mean, you could build it all yourself, you could buy it, everything, you could build and buy it together, right? So it's just about, I think the key thing is, who are they serving at the end of the day? So when we talk internal platforms, maybe it's kind of like the way I think about it, it's like platform for internal stakeholders, right? Because that's like from a business outcome who we're trying to solve for, right? The developer, again, like, you know, you don't need to repeat the wheel here, but I think ultimately it's really trying to solve for those, you know, those KPIs for driving more productivity and efficiency in your organization. And I think, so whether we want to name it like internal platforms or platforms for internal stakeholders, like that's like whatever, but I think like making sure that we're not getting too tied in terms of like, you know, external customer outcomes, because then that involves other things like sales and go to market and how like all those kind of things on the platform side. It gets very, very complicated, and I don't think that's the focus of this paper, right? So that's kind of like what I was thinking. So
yeah, well, I'm won over by Abby's argument that at the end of the day, you need, like, if it might just be a wiki that says go to this page, but you need the layer, and that is internal. So if we can define
or
it
just simple tech documentation, right? Like that, I've heard for many folks that is like, you know, nascent engineering teams, that might be what it is, right? And then they kind of do things independently. So yeah.
Okay, so by the way, I'm going to skip the last topic, but because I want to talk about some of the second level stuff. But 1 second, I just want to wrap this, if that's okay. I
just one really quick thing to add. I agree. Like I agree with Abby when it comes to like if you are doing stuff with just like a singular PaaS service somewhere, like this is not the paper for you. I think in that case, like this is internal, but at the same time, like you mentioned, Josh, like you're not excluding someone that's kind of creating some sort of like, you know, platform with platform, because that's what we are building. We're creating a platform to build platforms. We're creating an external, internal developer platform, or whatever you want to call it. But like I get it. When I read this white paper, I know my position in all of this. So I don't get confused. Like I don't feel excluded from stuff by doing that. So I
And for
think
those
we're
using
yeah.
Same position
yeah.
from us. Yeah.
Yeah, and for those using a pass as well, like Heroku, right? I think this is kind of demonstrating some thought leadership, but maybe here are the things you need to think about as you want to scale and everything as well, right? So it's fluid, right? This isn't something that, you know, like I settle on one thing. And platform engineering is a trend that's gaining steam, and it's meant to improve your organization for the long term, right? And I think what we're doing in this paper is trying to help kind of carve the path for that. So yeah.
So yeah, so in terms of getting this in, I think we said it fits at the end of the attributes section. Let's try to get it into a paragraph or two and get these things in. I'm open to take a shot. Abhinav, I know you've started working on it, so maybe we can work together. Yeah, maybe we even open an issue, because it's like, it's kind of a new topic. So I might open an issue and then write a paragraph or two and work with you there.
Yeah, for this one, I think it's better we have an explicit issue, so it's so we don't mix things up. So yeah.
I'll write that down. Okay.
So do you mean the platform attribute section?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the last thing that I put here, but I think I'm going to suggest that we skip over it so we can talk, because we have Dinesh and Alejandro here. The last one is about metrics, which I could really use. I know, Saeem, thank you for your thoughts there. It's just what's there, what I put in is kind of novel, and I don't know if it's, you know, if it makes sense, you know, if there's other things I need to read more. But yeah, so take a look there. Let's not go into it now, but chime in on the issue. The next thing here, paper publication, we're not going to go into that either, but like maybe Colin, maybe next time, because we'll be at Content Complete next time, hopefully. So we'll be ready to, you know, really think about this. Maybe you can tell us then. Is that okay, Colin? Give us an update then.
Yeah, that's good.
Cool. Yeah, and then this last thing. So let's second level work items. I mean, we brought this up. The idea is, you know, we're setting a stage for ourselves to be able to find synergies, conventions, everything else in the individual capabilities. So when I saw that OpenCP stuff, I mean, I talk with Stefan a lot, and I'm very into Kubernetes API as a foundational platform. So I was very excited. Dinesh, do you want to tell us what you're thinking there? I'll just let you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for letting us come and talk about it, and thank you for also finding the project, I think, on your own. So the history of this was a crazy conversation Alejandro and I had. So actually, do you all know what Civo is and what we do? Or if I give you a 30-second thing of where a public cloud provider, we provide managed Kubernetes clusters as a core competency. We get clusters up in 90 seconds, and we're kind of going after the big three and trying to change the way that people consume public cloud and try and make things a lot more ethical is our really big thing. So by ethical, I mean not holding people's data ransom with things like egress costs. So that's what we're really pushing towards doing. So Kubernetes is our core competency. So we live and breathe kubectl almost every day, either through something like K9s or on the command line. And Alejandro and I had a really weird conversation where we said, wouldn't it be cool if we could provision a managed Kubernetes cluster or an object store with kubectl directly? And rather than going through some of the other options at the moment, which is you have a management cluster that you then put an operator or something on that then has custom resources that you then go and create, who manages that cluster? How do you spin it up? Who keeps it up to date? And it's honestly, it drives me mad because it's really awkward to do. And I think this group has probably seen that problem over and over again. And we are in a fortunate position where we have known state in our databases already. So why don't we have the ability to give you that known state through kubectl? So basically have a set of API endpoints that you talk directly to your cloud provider with, that respond with custom resource definitions and define an API of what we support. And that's where Open Control Plane comes up. So I think one of the key things that maybe is missed from at least our documentation and the way we presented this is that Open Control Plane would never be hosted by anyone in this room, apart from maybe me. And it would be endpoints that public cloud providers host themselves alongside their existing API endpoints. So that we as end users, sorry, one sec. Sorry about that. Yeah, as I was saying, so the idea is that public cloud providers like myself would host that endpoint, and this is the way that you interact with it. One of the frustrations I have as a cloud provider is I've got a CLI that I have to maintain. So every time there is a new product I want to launch, I have to write my API endpoints, I have to write a CLI, and then I have to get all of my end users to update their CLI. And then there's a bug. So then I have to go and write a new version of the CLI, update that, and then for the next 6 months, I am fighting bug reports of there's this bug in my CLI. First question, have you updated the CLI? Oh no, I'm 6 months old. Please update it. Cool, your problem's fixed. And it's a constant support process. So what Open Control Plane allows us to do is, because we're defining the API endpoints almost on the fly, if I add a new feature, I just present out on the API resources endpoint, cool, object storage is now available at V1 endpoints, and people can now be submitting me specifications in a V1 endpoint, and I will go through and create them. If in 6 months I release more functionality inside my object storage endpoint, I can release a new spec called V2. Using some of the Kubernetes principles on allowing upgradable specs, I will now accept V1 or V2, and it is my responsibility as a cloud provider to upgrade the specification and now deliver you either a V2 object store or a V1 object store when you ask for it. So this is the main goal of at least what we're doing at Civo. And as we were developing it, we were like, well, wouldn't it be awesome if we could give this away and we get general adoption from this? So then now as an end user, I've got a single YAML spec, which is a V1 for an object store that I provide to Civo. I then provide that same spec to DigitalOcean and I get a Spaces, or I give it to Amazon and I get an S3 bucket. So that is what we're looking to do. Whether or not we get wider adoption to do that is, I don't know. I would love it from an end user point of view. I would love if we could do that. But that's where we're starting from as of today. Some of the things that we're thinking are out of scope for the project is maybe where some of the confusion has come in, and the control plane definition is that we're not looking really to reconcile state as such. So it's not doing that looping through or anything. I don't think that should be a core competency of what we're doing, because it's the unified API endpoint and interface that we're looking to really solve. And also for me to kill off a CLI I don't have to maintain anymore. Hopefully that's cool, but yeah, open to questions, Abby.
More mute buttons. No, that's really helpful. So I think I had a missing piece here, so I'm going to try my hand at it. If somebody were to make a request to this API, would they be using a tool like curl versus a tool like kubectl apply? Like, would they, as in you said, oh, none of us would be hosting the thing you'd make this request to, the cloud providers would be.
Yeah.
How would I make a request? Would it be via like a curl request, like post, and then that YAML would be my like body?
Effectively, yeah. So all that kubectl is doing is it's a fancy curl command, which wraps some authentication and some type discovery. So when you do a kubectl get nodes, what's actually happening is firstly kubectl is doing authorization, then it's querying the API server again with a REST request of let me know, do you actually support nodes? And if you support nodes, what versions do you support? Then it will go, right, you've not specified which version of nodes we want, but the latest one is V2. So I'll make another request to go get API/node/V2 or whatever it is. Then that spits out a YAML response or a JSON response And kubectl is now formatting that into a nice pretty table or into JSON output or whatever that's doing.
I guess the point is that that requires an API server, a Kubernetes API server running. And what I heard you say, one of your frustrations is that bootstrapping to get a Kubernetes
Yep.
API server running. So that's why that's why I used curl, and maybe that wasn't a great
So you don't.
statement
So
to make, but I'd be making a request to
project
something.
doesn't need it. Yeah, the project doesn't
No
need API
Kubernetes
server.
running. Yeah.
No Kubernetes running at all. So
Right.
it is a REST server that responds as if it were a Kubernetes
Gotcha.
API server.
So it matches that way of interacting, of wrapping up the authentication, authorization, all those things, and getting the response. But it would be done through the actual URL endpoint would not be your API, your existing Kubernetes API server. It would be your cloud provider's endpoint. That would go. So you're almost more competing in the space of like, why go create a Terraform or a Pulumi or a CloudFormation to bootstrap up your Kubernetes, because that all has a lot of heavy lifting behind it. Bootstrap your Kubernetes using kubectl, but with a request that cuts off to the cloud provider instead of to the API. Okay, I missed that in the original explanation, so that's really helpful. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Yeah, and we obviously announced it last week. One of the interesting conversations I had was that going after a managed Kubernetes endpoint is mad, because everyone has a very different thing. But actually, what happens if we start thinking about domain name registration? That's a fairly well-defined set of requests. Could we sit this in front of things like Cloudflare and GoDaddy? So now, rather than you having to learn the GoDaddy API, and then you go, right, we're moving all of our domains from GoDaddy to Cloudflare because of whatever, you now need to learn the Cloudflare API and do transition. What happens if you do a kubectl change context and apply my manifests exactly as they are, but now you're hitting Cloudflare that's doing the domain name registration? And then that conversation about, oh, well, Cloudflare and GoDaddy aren't going to complain about the spec of a dead domain name, are they?
There's so much here.
What about writing let's just say, so we have the main cloud providers. What about if you wanted to write your own integration? Maybe you have a private cloud that's running, you're running a VMware, and you want, some hook to, get resources from that. I guess you could point to the API endpoint, but what about the authorization and governance? Like, how do you manage that underneath the covers?
So what we have done is we've released this shim, which is sitting in between, that acts on one side as the API server, and then on the other side is a set of gRPC endpoints that a cloud provider or anyone else will start working with. So what we've got is the example Civo one. So it's sort of the shim on this side, and then our specific implementation on the other side that talk over gRPC. And all we're doing is translating our existing API commands, REST API, over gRPC. So if you do a get clusters, for example, there is a REST endpoint that talks over gRPC to our implementation, and that is now hitting our existing API endpoints to do a get clusters. Then it returns a REST response, goes over gRPC, back over REST. But that shim could be used by anyone, and then you do the provider implementation in the middle to whatever you want. Does that answer the question?
Kind of like Backstage, but for the APIs. I'm just thinking that, like, you're giving a framework for people to plug in just the API.
Sorry.
So basically, you can put the shim in the front, and you can connect your implementation with WordPress or whatever you want it in the backend, and you can create blog posts using a YAML file and kubectl. That's it.
So one of the things that I'm trying to wrap my head around, so this will basically be kind of like an API gateway type service then, because Just to like clarify, like I said, it like we're building a platform for building platforms, and one of the things that I kind of have to deal with is that we're doing stuff with custom resource definitions, and while that is cool for us, we still want an API, you know, for people to use to kind of talk to our platform that builds platforms. So would I, for instance, instead of creating my own API gateway for this, could I then be using like open control plane to implement that type of abstraction against my platform?
Yeah, again, this is the conversations that we're just having, and I'm being introduced to this working group for the first time today, so apologies for my naivety there, but I think the answer is yes. What would be really interesting is that the specifications where we have for things like domain names and object stores is what would your idea of a platform YAML spec or custom resource be? And if this group goes, well, it would be cool if we had X, Y, and Z. Is it monitoring that is done with these specifications? That would then go into the open controls plane spec. And then as you're developing applications, you would have, Robert, your specific backend implementation, but the front end would always look the same. And then, you know, Josh, your, again, backend could be entirely different, but the front end for an application that your user is looking at would be the same. And the way we're looking at supporting that is almost every field in the spec is optional, because if not, you're locked into you must provide X, Y, and Z, which may not be correct, or getting that minimal viable set of things that are required. So for a domain name, you probably need a domain and an admin contact and a tech contact. Probably make those required, but yeah.
Because for the reason why I'm asking is because we're kind of building stuff. It would be great if I didn't have to build as much. Weirdly enough, we're lazy.
Yeah.
So because right now it's like, all right, we're building the service. The service itself works through, like I can literally have everything gone through GitOps, like if I wanted to. But at the same time, you know, I need to build an API abstraction because customers need to use this. If I do that, I kind of either have to build, well, not a front end right now, but at least some sort of like CLI tool, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like if this kind of like abstracts that to a certain point where I could just go like, this is our implementation.
Absolutely, it does. So to do that, you would need, there's the specifications folder, which are the custom resource definitions. If you fork that and put your own ones in there, you would need that. Then you would need to update, again, Alejandro, correct me if I'm wrong, do you need to update the shim, or would you just, with some gRPC endpoints that you would talk to in the backend?
So basically, the spec contain the gRPC specification, I mean, the product buffer specification and the Go file specification for the API. Then you need to create a new release of the spec, update the shim to put it all that inside the shim, and then use the same spec to create the server. So basically, the spec is to create the client in the shim and create the server in your implementation.
But once you've done that,
yeah, we are in the process of create just the product buffer, and the product buffer will be able to generate the Go file with the Kubernetes spec compatible with kubectl. I check in the Kubernetes project and they have multiple scripts to create things, but now we're doing by hand. But it will be, that is why we want to open, and the people added new things and collaborated with the project to do it in the better way.
Yeah, like I will paying attention, but at the same time, it's like I'm not really sure if this is something that I would kind of use as a end user, or if it's something that I would use to build stuff for my product. Like, I think it would be really nice for me, like if I could, you know, work in the same standard as other people are doing. But yeah, it's really interesting.
One
This
thing
might
that
be actually useful
Hey.
for Backstage as well. Sorry, Josh, I was going to say that this for Backstage because we have the like everything is already kind of in Kubernetes like objects, but the REST API itself doesn't have the same API as Kubernetes. So like having that shim between and be able to just use like K9s to inspect a catalog would be pretty sweet.
So when you do K9s and then you've got like the list of resources that you select, if you use that, because they list the API resources, they just sit there as resources. So if you connect up our kubeconfig for Open Control Plane against Sivo, you just go, oh, clusters, firewalls, networks. They're all just listed there and you go through and you select it. And as I said, when we add object storage, the next time you as a user load up K9s, object store just pops up and it's good to go.
It's also an interesting way of using like crossplane maybe to orchestrate the order of applying stuff, like creating things. That was pretty interesting.
Crossplane would be behind OpenCP.
Yeah, we're not looking at, removing those. As I said, we're not the reconciling and the keeping state up to date is not a goal of this project. I think we can put stuff in there to enable those projects like Argo and Flux and Crossplane by putting, I know Stefan mentioned like resource definition or resource versions need to be in there to make operators work. Yeah, we'll add that, but we're not looking to create an operator that's always ensuring state.
Yes, Junaid, there is a quick question here. Like, I think we have a notion of Kubernetes APIs being everywhere. We see a lot of the project getting success out of being Kubernetes spec to everywhere. We've seen Crossplane come with the same notion that the OpenCP, but the Crossplane is actually giving us an opportunity like you can use Kubernetes feature outside of the Kubernetes. Basically, you create infrastructure in the cloud using Terraform, Pulumi, and anything. But once the cluster is stood up, you don't have this kind of drift detection and all reconciliation. And Crossplane actually does it very beautiful. If you have some kind of divergence in the let's say in the cluster and the Git repository is working very fine. But I'm kind of interesting, like what is actually OpenCP like? I think you have to look at the other Kubernetes, other pieces where Kubernetes API fits very well in. So what you actually, because in the Crossplane, you have so much composition, so much CRD that it's managing, patching, updating, security fixes. This is not a very easy task, to be honest with you. There's a steep learning curve to educate people around it. So what is the actually problem? You look at the other API server implementation, you look at it. And also like, for the day one, all the things is actually get my head around. I look so fancy. It's a great problem solving. But what happened for the day two? And who is actually the intended users of this OpenCP? Because I'm actually really confused at this moment of time. What happened? Like, do I just create API server? Who is actually consuming? The front end team consuming, back end team consuming, or the platform team consuming? So I need your thought on this as well.
Yeah, so I think it would be the platform team initially as our target user. So in terms of like day two operations, so upgrades would not be managed by Open Control Plane. There would be a specification for like spec.version, which you're sitting at GKE 1.25 or GKE stable. That's being passed over to Google. And then when you do an upgrade, your spec is changing from stable to development or whatever. Open Control Plane is now just passing that over to your GKE cluster, and GKE are actually still managing how they do rolling upgrades or whatever that they're doing there. So, we're not getting involved with the infrastructure itself. This is literally like an API translation service between existing provider APIs and hopefully a common standard on this side. Does that answer the question?
Yes, definitely, absolutely. And
Getting a little to time, so I just want to call that out.
Yes, definitely. But just a final, very small question. Like, I think having a Kubernetes API server is actually gives you other kind of very wonderful things. Like in the Kubernetes, you have a policy engine. You can generate policy as code in Kubernetes. So there are very wonderful solution out there in the market. Chip Zeller is for the Kyberno community is also on the call as well. So having this space, actually, how you think this space getting evolved over next few months, according to your knowledge?
Can I chime in on that? Because I have a question. I know we're running out of time, and I think it's part of this, which is, could you have used Kubernetes itself to do this instead of creating a separate shim?
So the problem we were trying to solve there is you've still got then a Kubernetes cluster that you need to spin up, that you need to query. If we put it directly inside
now
Kubernetes.
You have to spin up your open control plane still.
No, because I want a cloud provider to host it.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm a little worried. Like, what concerns me is, will it diverge? In other words, there's a lot of stuff that you don't even think about in the Kubernetes API. Will this end up like a Kubernetes-like API, and kubectl works 80% of the time? And that's, I don't know.
I mean, yeah, the aim is that the only interface with this would be kubectl, and that the shim and then the proxy is pushed there. I mean, for us at Civo, I might drop the rest of my API and make effectively my public API just be compatible directly with kubectl. Because again, for us, our core product is Kubernetes. So we know that 99% of our users are going to have kubectl anyway. So why not make their lives easier? I know there's time.
Okay.
I know there are other questions. Is there anything you want me to carry on with, or are people
So
running
yeah,
out?
I was
Sorry.
just gonna say, maybe like, so that's the whole idea of the second level. Like, I'd like to like bring in Abby is on Kratix. I'm sure she has opinions here. The Crossplane, maybe Victor will come. The KCP folks. Like, I'd like to maybe group the people that are working on platform APIs and do a double click. Or maybe you want to do that. Like, I want to somehow do that. So I think the next step are.
Yeah, I mean, Victor was out at our platform, so at our event last week. So I've already spoken to Victor. I've seen Victor Fabric from Upbound, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've already spoken about it. So we'll see what Crossplane feel about it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of next steps. So if that's the next steps, do you want to get those? You want me to help you get those people together? Like, how should I do that?
I mean, so I've already opened communications with Vultr, Dio, Linode. I've already got conversations with them. I think I have a pending introduction to head of product at Google as well. So from our point of view, we're firstly getting feedback from end users. Like, I feel you would be end users of it rather than really people dealing with it day to day. And then I am pushing to try and get in front of the right people at cloud providers to say, do you like this or not? And what if you do or do not like it? We're still going to be pushing this anyway, because internally at Civo, as I say, we're going to be driving this to replace my CLI, even though people will probably kill me. That is what I want to be doing, because it's one less project for us to manage. But if people are still loving this in a year's time and it's up for donation to CNCF, we are open to that. It's why we have pushed it out as Open Control Plane on its own rather than under a Civo branded thing. So
cool. So I think what I'm taking away is, let's just keep an eye on it. I mean, we can bring it up in these meetings if we want to. Yeah, I'm so excited to hear you're pursuing with cloud providers, because that's the key, is to get some adoption. And we'll see ourselves as end users. I mean, personally, I'll try it out and try to give you feedback.
Yeah, that'd be great. It's not feature complete. There are things like applies. kubectl apply doesn't work. We know what that is. We will keep working on it.
I don't like feature complete things. This is nothing bad.
Actually, apply work. When you create a resource, apply work. But if you try to apply it again, the patch update don't work, because there is a dependency with server side apply or client side apply.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, if you apply it once, it should work, right? Don't need to apply it again.
Yeah,
But
Yeah, but-
yeah, I agree with I agree with Josh. Like if there is anything that like the working group can do to help stuff, and you mentioned people you're talking to, you know, there's if there's anything like you know, on the Microsoft side of things, I could probably find the correct people to introduce there.
Is it Lachi would be leading it that side, or is he Google? I mean, he's Microsoft, isn't he?
Everson?
Late,
Yeah, I think so.
Everson.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think I've got his contact. I was on stage with him talking at KubeCon, so hopefully he remembers me.
It made
Yeah.
also, you know, they've done, and did you see Cattle actually? So, you know, they've done a lot with AutoRest and with generating Swagger stuff.
Yes.
And they just released this week something called Cattle, CADL. I'll share it here. That this might fit in there. Here it is. It's a
I
little
can
more
never-
generic.
Can never
OpenAPI.
pay attention to what's going on anymore. Like I
Yeah, I don't know, but this, yeah, for Microsoft, maybe this fits there. And I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, have a read
but-
of that. Thank you.
Yeah, but and like in general, if there's people on the product teams for AKS and stuff like that, I can probably
If I've not had an introduction conversation about control plane with Microsoft. So if you do know the right people, I will drop my email.
I know
here.
people that know people.
That is spelled right. So yeah, just pass on my email, and or do an introduction directly. I'm completely open to that, Robert. But yeah, the more people, as I say, the more cloud vendors, cloud providers I can get talking about this, the happier I will be as an end user.
And it helps Sivo too, you know, when you're the
I would
Yes, upfront.
agree. Like this is something that benefits how like end users. And there's been other initiatives to do something sort of like this, but it, you know, it kind of diverged, and
It's a challenge.
there's a whole lot of there's a lot of things. There's stuff out there. So
yeah, and I fully understand that not all cloud vendors are going to see this as a good thing and are just not going to get involved, and there's going to be a whole set of conversations that need
Yep.
to happen.
You know the ASO, I'm assuming you know 8CK and all those, right? Are you talking with, do you know what I'm talking about? Azure Service Operator? Oh,
No.
okay. Oh, so okay, so ACK is the Azure controllers for Kubernetes, which is how it's the same problem. That's why what you just said reminded me of it. They publish AWS controllers for Kubernetes is CRDs for the Azure services. Azure Service Operator is the same thing for Azure. Google actually has one too. I know.
Yeah, no, I did see this. I think it was announced like November or something, and the AWS one I think was.
It's gotten
But
more
again,
mature. Yeah.
But I think
But
it's. I
you
think
know, it's pulling teeth to get them to do it, but they did it for Crossplane, and so you were in the same boat. So
I think all of these things that I've seen still have the same issue of you need a management cluster that I would like to solve. Right, because even the
Yes.
Amazon one, you need to deploy a cluster, then put this operator on it, and
Yeah.
then you interact with that rather
Yes.
than going direct.
So what you would want is a bundle of the ACK specs to push into your server, and then the implementation wherever it is. I like it.
But remember that server's hosted directly with Amazon.
Yes. So yeah, I get. So for instance, like these operators, you would have to set up a cluster to run the operators on, which then you can interact with. While this is more of a like directly against the cloud vendor, which then would mean, like again coming around to like to my question, that would mean like I will be an end user of that, because I will, instead of having control clusters to do these things for you, like we're building a platform that kind of does that. So I would then use, you know, I would interact with, for instance, like Sivo.
Yes.
You need
Sure
different
is.
providers on the. Is that what you're saying, Robert? Like for Azure, you're not going to call Azure Service Operator. That's silly. You're going to use the spec, but then you're going to call Azure's APIs directly.
Yeah, we're going to do a managed application platform. We it's going to be Azure first, obviously, due to me But at some point, it's like you need a application platform or an environment or whatever you want to call it. Check off for Azure, check off for Civo, check off for whatever, and the users are not going to have to like think, oh, but I'm going to put up a Kubernetes cluster and I need these policies and I need to secure it this way and this is how we do application. Like that is abstracted away. So I would be an end user of this against cloud vendors. So
Yeah.
which means is I would be really good for me if this went through, because I would have to do things once.
Yeah.
Robert,
and
can you write the provider for Azure?
No. No, I didn't. But I have to user of that through various means. Again, if I could have one way of dealing with stuff from the platform that I'm building, that would be very good.
I think we're not looking to displace things like Crossplane. There is value in Crossplane that we are not addressing and is not part of this project, because we see things like Argo and Flux and Crossplane solving those problems way better than we can, because that is their core competency. But having, if you go down the route of maybe like a managed Argo or a managed Crossplane, but it's a very slim thing now, rather than having all of these resources and every single customer effectively having to have their own Crossplane install with their own custom resources in it. Actually, with a single well-defined spec, and you've got GitOps on one side, and all you've got is this reconcile application, and you've got a cloud provider on the other side, it becomes really powerful.
Yeah. So from our end, what we're doing, we're way over time now, but from what mine and what we're doing is we're using Flux and the TF controller to make a service that is built using Terraform, because that's what most people that do infrastructure as code do. So it just makes it easier. Like if you can put it in to a root module, we can make a service out of it. But that works pretty well, except the fact that you kind of get the same type of issue. Like we'll have to have a root module for doing our applications on Azure, and then a second one for doing it on AWS, and the third one for Google Cloud, and the fourth one for Civo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we could kind of like do that in one way of dealing with these type of resources, it would be easier for us, obviously.
So we're gonna win Robert over to Kubernetes as the core API, right? That's what I'm just thinking, Robert. Like you make us think of Terraform.
I am the Terraform man.
Yeah.
So if you can win me over there, then yeah.
Yeah, have a look at the demo. It is Terraform-like, right? Because the demo that we have shown is you've got a Kubernetes cluster defined in YAML that's very similar to a TF file for a Kubernetes cluster. Especially if you look at the Civo provider, you could probably one-to-one map the fields over, and then rather than doing a Terraform applied, that again we as Civo have had to write the provider that you have downloaded, and if there's a new feature, you've got to do a Terraform update. Like no, none of that. It's just kubectl apply, done.
Yep. And it makes a lot of sense, and it would again make my life much easier while setting up infrastructure. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's potentially something this group can do, and for people that is if you are going to your existing incumbent cloud providers and say, hey, this is cool, I would love to use it, or even start doing the providers. I mean, I think there is a concern we've had about hosting providers, right? Because as Civo, I can host my own one, and you're going to trust me with your Civo API keys because I've already got them. But if I'm able to get open source contributions to get a Microsoft provider, and I as Civo host it, how much trust am I going to get? Because you're going to have to provide me as Civo your Microsoft keys to then pass them on to Microsoft. And I think that will be really interesting challenge for this of like, well, until we get adoption from Microsoft, people are going to have to spinning up their own open control plane servers to to proxy in between cloud providers because you don't want that key sharing. So if there is a well-known option, I think you can do like short-lived keys, and we'll need to update the way that authorization works. But if there's an ability to solve that, I mean, or alternatively, I stick this up in Amazon, I stick it up in Microsoft, and do that as part of this project. I don't know. Or
We'll come back
alternatively,
for the last topic that I mean, we're not getting this today, but secrets. I really want to pursue. There's a couple efforts at Red Hat, you know, mechanisms to generate secrets, ephemeral ones in a standard way, and then you could that would solve your problem too. It's a backstage problem also. They need to connect all these.
Yeah, and secret management is hard, right?
Again, this is why we're building the stuff we're building. So other don't have to think about all that, which means that I have to think about that.
Yeah,
which is fine. It's what I'm supposed to do. But cool. Like I'm gonna pay a lot of attention, and if there is anything,
yeah. I mean, I mean, if you are using these other services and you've got a common specification across them, it would be really good to get your input on what the specification for products Civo don't offer look like, right? Because and also comparing across different providers. If you're getting a Microsoft one and an AWS one, what are the common fields across that you'd like to put into a single specification, and proposing that over to open control plane? Because
because you got some apart, like a couple of things that kind of makes this a little bit hard. Like for us, we're gonna do we're like, I'm saying application platform, but that at the moment means, you know, spinning up Kubernetes, you know, and we might expand on that depending on the scenario and so on and so forth. But so it does that. But when you then speak to different providers, you have different VM SKUs, you have different way of doing certain aspects of it. Not really, since it's Kubernetes, so we're kind of lucky there, since it can't be Kubernetes, but if it doesn't have certain aspects of it. But then we are, you know, what if we were going to do something like app services in Azure, you know, versus other cloud providers, like they're just like put in your code and it will run. Like, how do you abstract that? They might have totally different concepts. It's easy with Kubernetes because it's conformance. You have to do Kubernetes to call it Kubernetes. But
Folks,
I think that would be.
I don't want to stop you, but I need to wrap because I gotta go.
Sorry, at least it's interesting.
Yeah, super. That's why I don't want to stop you. Feel free to, after this meeting, jump back on or use Slack.
It is Valentine's Day, and I'm supposed to do the dinner, so I probably should get started.
I will. Yeah, reach out on Slack. Happy to carry on the thread or start a new thread. So just tag me, and I will get back to you.
Excellent. Cool.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I'll post this video pretty soon, and we'll talk to you all soon. See you online.
Have a great day. Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.